What is the only kind of man who has reasons for wriggling out of reality by lies? The man who suffers from reality itself. This is the Yokum Strength Podcast with me, your host, Austin Yokum. And on this episode of the podcast, we have the legendary Joel Smith. As many of you know, Joel is a legend in the sports performance field and the host of the Just Fly podcast. And on this episode of the podcast, Joel takes us down the rabbit holes of disinhibition, the art of coaching rhythm, and the importance of the unmeasurables in coaching. This was an amazing podcast with a coach that I'm really glad to be able to call a friend. If you guys want a really deep dive into Joel's work, I can't recommend the Elastic Essentials course and the acceleration course that he put out enough. I remember back in the day taking the Elastic Essential course. I think it was 2 years ago now, and I couldn't stop quoting it on this podcast and telling you guys to go listen to it. But Joel was only releasing them at certain times, but now both courses are open. And really can't recommend them enough. There's no plug. I don't get any money for saying that. They're just two courses that I've taken in the past that have really helped my understanding of the elastic side, the side of speed in sports performance, and really truly believe they're game changers that every coach should take and should study. So looking forward to the next week. We'll have Derek Smith on the podcast. I'm pretty excited for that. He's fucking hilarious on Twitter. He just has a very practical and funny side to the sports performance in the high school sector, and just looking forward to talking to him about this high school sector transitioning out of the sports performance world and just his approach to strength conditioning. I'm headed out to Florida for World Softball on Wednesday this week. It's going to be a nice little vacation. It's starting to get cold out. It's still pretty nice here in Minnesota, but starting to get cold. So excited to go on a beach, go get some sunlight. Been prepping the bod, been getting the Moms for Moms in ready for that. So excited for that, and then excited to see how far we can take the softball tournament. Not going with our full stack team, but headed with one of the softball teams here in Minnesota. So we'll see how our performance is. It's time to put our money where our mouth is with all this training that we talked about and all these daily sacrifices in Florida for softball. That's about it coming up. As always, I really appreciate you guys listening to this podcast, sharing, spreading the good word. I've been receiving a bunch of messages on Instagram about the value you guys are getting from this podcast. And again, just want to make it known that I am very appreciative that people are taking their time out of their day to listen to this podcast, to spread it, to share it. And if you guys ever have any recommendations or any guests that you think I should have on, or just anything that you guys got out of the podcast, I'd love to hear it. Again, social media is really nice because you're able to get a ton of feedback really quickly. And what I've been realizing with the podcast is it's not as interactive and you don't get as much feedback instantly, which is a good and a bad thing. But the more interactive I can make this, I think the better for me it'll be, just because I enjoy the interactive piece, and the better, hopefully, product that it becomes. It's live on YouTube now. If you guys like the video version or just like watching on YouTube, we got all of our podcasts live there now. So from here on forward, in the last, I think, 2 months of podcasts have been live on YouTube. So if you guys like that, I would love to know your guys' thought process on the video aspect of it, where you guys like watching them. If you like watching them, if you just like listening to them, if the video aspect's worth it or not. Yeah. And I would just love your guys' feedback on any of that, and really appreciate you guys listening and taking your time out of the day to listen to this meathead ramble. So thank you guys for listening. Hopefully you guys enjoy this podcast. Keep chopping wood. Go get it this week. Boom. Before we hit the intro music, I wanted to introduce to you guys the Yokum Strength Insider. The Yokum Strength Insider is our online training platform that takes all of the ideas that we talk about on this podcast and implements them into a program that is available to you at the touch of your fingers. Our goal with the Yokum Strength Insider is to create better movers, to level up your life, and to move forward from where you are. We do this in a holistic fashion. Not only will you receive a program that has helped hundreds of people become better movers, you'll also receive access to our app that allows you to track everything, has video links for all exercises, and allows you to be in constant communication with a Yokum Strength coach. Along with this, you'll get our 30-page PDF nutrition and lifestyle guidelines. That includes everything from what to eat, how much of it to eat, why we're eating it, meditation habits, and other lifestyle habits that we implement with our clients to really level up their lives. If you're interested in trying out one of these programs, use podcast 25 in the discount section right before you pay for 25% off your first program. Boom.
This is the Yokum Strength Podcast. Take the leap down the rabbit hole with us as we interview elite level guests to unravel what high performance really is.
Coach, welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And again, it's cool to see the upgrades in the studio. I like it.
Yeah. Last time we were here, it was just straight basement. You're kind of making fun of it. We were talking. No, I think I was recording for your course or something like that. You're like, we got to work on that background, and you were showing me all the cool stuff you did with your background. But yeah, we got the flag, but like you said, we still got the fire hydrant and the kind of the rocky look here.
Yeah, you can't get overly fancy. You still got to have some of those old school, like you haven't made it yet, like, principles at play. So yeah, and my basement ceiling is right above.
Yeah, you got a little bit of the better backdrop, but it's still in that rocky setting. Like you said, you don't want to lose your roots. If you lose your roots, you never know. We could full sell out and go Liver King on everybody.
Yeah. I don't know. What would your It said the Liver King. If you were like in the world of play and motor learning, is there an equivalent that you could think of? Or
I don't know, man. Who was like the biggest sellout in that kind of field? It's kind of hard to be a sellout in the world of play because you can't really sell it.
No, I don't think you can.
It's like trying to red pill people into going to go play at the playground or something like that. It's like, okay, like, how do you pay me for that? Maybe you sell a supplement off the side. I don't know. But
yeah,
that is talking about the play aspect. That is something that I really we talked about right before we recorded the podcast. It's something that I value from you, and that I feel like you do a really, really nice job of. Is like I kind of always live in that woo-woo world, and I've been trying to draw myself back into the blue pill world a little bit just to be able to pull some other people out. But what you do a nice job of, and maybe this is the track background in you, is like you have that blue pill background, same as me, but the very analytical, masculine approach to things that is like logical and has a purpose. And you intermix this, like this you talked about on your course, the feminine approach to things, like talking about the fluidity, the rhythm, the joy of movements. And a lot of times, if you don't approach it in the way that you approach it, you lose coaches because you can't measure joy. You can't measure like rhythm. You can't measure fluidity. And you're like, well, like you guys are just out there. It's whatever. And they kind of tune you out. So I just like to talk to you about that kind of one, how you've got to that point of tying those things in, and two, how you're using these things in your training to where we're looking at, that is rhythmic. That is fluid. If that question makes sense, but trying to tie that in together, like how do you look at that as a coach and a sports performance practitioner?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, I actually just sent, it's funny you're talking about the masculine and feminine. I just sent an email talking about play and how, like, I think people will look at like the feminine or like play or joy or exploration, and they almost look at it as like the cherry on top. Like, that's nice to have. I hope you can do that. That's cool. But in reality, it's like, it works so much hand in hand together with that masculine framework. Like, how can you infuse your intuition, joy, your inner process with the external process? And I agree. It's so interesting. I mean, actually, as much as people hate on social media, I am thankful for it because it does help to spread messages. I think we always need to be grateful for that. But it's also interesting because, as I'm sure you're well familiar with, like the algorithm and scaling, everything to scale, for things to become viral in so many ways, especially in sports performance, it has to be something people can feel like they can put a number on. Like, do these 3 drills that all are very contained and all look, like you could do them. Those are the things that a lot of people like, or it's familiar. People are familiar with these exercises and things like that. As soon as you start to get some layers into the art of things, it can become immediately more difficult to grasp. And although that can be difficult for scaling, it's also what makes things awesome, because it's the thing that AI can't just replace. It's part of the thing that really prioritizes human intuition. And the irony of it all, I've had 2 coaches who have mentioned this, Paul Cater, who I know you're very familiar with, and then Aaron Cantor, who was just on my own podcast. They both have said this to me in like maybe a 2 or 3 month span. But as soon as you try to quantitate, put a number on something, which you do need to, but I should say, as soon as you try to make something a formula, it no longer, you can't get into that flow state. It's like a barrier to flow state. So the irony is that it's almost like this gated knowledge in some perspective of things, without trying to be a cult of it, because I think it could be that if you tried to maybe make it a system again. But that's, I guess, what's interesting with that whole piece of it. It's just, you just have to experience it, and you can use your own intuition and foresight and vision to make it your own. So what's funny is that I bet you that the further technology gets along, we will start to be able to put numbers on some of these things, like rhythm, right? If you were an accelerometer and you ran and it tracked, like it gave you a rhythmic value, now all of a sudden more people would probably be into rhythm because they could see the number behind it. And then eventually the computer is going to probably be able to write you a program on that. But I'll just say, like, I can give you an example. I had an athlete drive over to Cincinnati, track athlete who we just did sprinting and running. And a lot of it was based off of, and this was an athlete, he had sent me his videos ahead of time. I could just tell he was very much like a cerebral guy, hit a lot of the sprint positions that are very popular. You can tell he's trying to get his knees up and trying to point his toe and trying to do all this stuff. And I really enjoy working with those people because, and I do think there's always something that stuff can help you with. It shows you a new piece of the equation. The goal is just, you have to integrate it. You can't just do something somebody said because that's the way to do it. You have to notice how that part feels, even if it is overcoached, and see what it does for you, and then see how it integrates. But I think the problem is people just go all the way and they assume that's how you do it. So a lot of what I do this with a great many of my clients, especially those who I can tell came from either a very strong, like, coached up background. They're very like overthinker types. Is the whole first 30 minutes is just based off of undoing, like it's disinhibiting. So often we think, how do I activate a muscle? How do I teach this motion? I almost feel like for a minute we should just hang all that up and say, how do I deactivate muscles? How do I deactivate tension? How do I deactivate all these patterns that are kind of holding me back? Some of the epitome of that, and this is where part of my, you could call it a conundrum, but I'm trying to find ways to sneak this in. Is I was in Asheville at Rafe Kelly's, one of his sponsored Evolve and Move Play workshops, and Aaron Cantor was running it. And in Aaron Cantor's warm-up, the first 5 minutes is literally just like a Qigong shake. You're just shaking your body, like shaking joints, shaking whatever feels like you need to do. And it's just funny because if you went to the gym and you did that, like, there's a lot of people who give too many fucks to do that. Like, that's not something you could just go and do. But I've kind of thought about, how do I sneak it in context of like, hey, you could do these like little mini sprint dribble things, but turn that into a disinhibition, because the goal is not to hit any position. It's literally just to feel your hips unlock. So we would do things like that. We would do like leg swings and arm swings where I'm like, just feel dead weight, feel the limb moving. You're not moving it. And the whole first part of the warm up was that kind of motion. Then we, for example, worked into bear crawls where I'm like, feel motion side to side, and then just go up and sprint. And where I used to put a lot more in someone's head, I'd be like, all right, now you're going to get up and sprint and you're going to feel this. Now I just shut the hell up and I give them a chance to notice something before I put it in their head. I think a lot of coaching, and it's just funny, the more you get down this road, is you just realize, and I see it in myself, like just leading athletes on, oh, hey, you're going to feel this. Oh, didn't you feel that? You know, it happens all the time. And again, I talk about like the cup of like not overfilling the cup of the athlete, like leave that cup empty enough that the athlete can fill it in on themselves, or fill it in by themselves. They can make the connections, give them a chance to make those connections. So we would do stuff like that where we're just disinhibiting. We're using the extrasensory motion, working on the ground, trying to get motion on the ground, get up and accelerate. Now go back down and crawl, just keep going through that. And once you learn to observe those things, and a lot of this was like time from a Darien Barr, just learning to watch movement a lot more closely. You start to watch the hips and you start to realize, you just start to see little subtle things that change. And one of the things I like that Darien had said a lot was that millimeters become waves. So even just a little unlocking of the hips, something that's relatively small, actually is a big deal. It's a big deal because the grand total, the end of the whip, your foot and your arm, that does make a big difference in stride length and fluidity and finishing races. And, you know, I know it's very difficult to prevent injuries on field, but I do believe that the more movement options we can create for athletes in that fine-tuned rhythmic setting, I don't know how you'd study that exactly, but I would like to believe there's something even there with like unlocking, having a better internal rhythm. I do know too that, and I'm kind of rambling, I apologize, I'll leave this at the last piece, but in watching Paul Cater start with a rhythm-based training session, the kids who can pick up on rhythm and dance and move and turn like the speed ladder into a dance, they tend to, it's not about the speed ladder. I'm not trying to say whether good or bad. If you can use it as a dance tool, then that's cool. Those are the athletes who do tend to be able to pick up other skills better as well. So that's something I noticed there. So ultimately, to me, a lot of it is disinhibition and going through that process to pairing the disinhibition with not overfilling the cup and letting athletes make connection before you put something in their head. And then learning to look for things and just being good at that observation. So often we look for, like, let's just take an A skip because it's so familiar. The coach would say, well, heel up, knee up, toe up. And that's all they look for. They don't look for anything else. And then they watch an athlete run and they don't look for anything else. But instead of that, with an open mind, watch just, well, how well are the athlete's hips moving? How well are their shoulders moving? Did that inhibition exercise change anything? Don't say anything to the athlete. Just watch the process unfold. And then say the right thing at the right time. That's really the art of coaching, I feel. It's so easy to just say, do X, Y, Z. But that's also what scales, which is funny. But the more I learn about the art of it, the more enjoyable it is. The more enjoyable it is for the athlete and that process of discovery. So just finding how to communicate that, to other coaches who are interested, I think is the trick a little bit. But I hope that gives you some good ideas of kind of how I look at that process.
Yeah. There's so many points I want to take that there too. The one thing right away, just touching on it, you talked about millimeters becoming waves, and Darian talking about that. That made me think about softball. If you hold a softball bat just the normal way, let's say your exit velo is 100 miles an hour. I've done things where if you drop a pinky off the softball and just like lengthen it just a tiny bit, you can get the 105. And if you overlap your hands, and these are millimeters, these are tiny placements of your hand. The length of the bat, the torque that you get on the bat, you can add 10 miles an hour just doing that. And you think of something like that, and it just made me realize, like, something like that in sprinting, it's going to be the same thing. Like that tiny shift in how the levers are working, or the torque that you're able to create can lead to massive differences if you're able to use it. Like one of the things in softball is, like, a lot of people aren't able to use it because they're not able to control it. Whereas like sprinting, it's your own body. So creating those millimeters is probably a little bit more important. But that made me think of that. And then you also you kind of just talked about my whole presentation I just gave, because like I based this whole presentation for the emergence thing about this Nietzsche quote that I read. It was like, I distrust all systemizers, for philosophy must be lived, not merely thought.
Yes.
And that like the more we try to systemize, the more we try to shove it into this like thought-based system, the farther we are away from the movement art that is in front of you. And like this is the whole paradox I feel like we create as coaches. It's like you have this whole complex, chaotic system that is the body. There are so many things going on that we don't have the answers to. So we try to funnel it into our systems, and we need to at some point to make some of it make sense. But the whole point of a system is to funnel it through so we can make sense in real life. And what we do, and what I feel like we really tend to do, is we funnel it into the system, and there's no back end funnel. It's just we shove it into this system and then don't pay attention to the paradoxes that we're just totally creating. It's like, that's not real life. That's your system. You never had this back end funnel of the system. You just forced it in there so that everything seems to make sense. But seeming to make sense, especially when there's paradoxes in everything that we are saying, that's not real life. Like, we're not living in reality anymore. And the more we double down on that fairy tale, the more we double down on that system, for a lot of coaches, the worse it gets, because then they're totally unable to live. And then you have the ego attached to, well, I've said the same thing for 10 years, even though now I know deep down it's not true, because a coach had showed me over and over again that I'm living in this fairy tale. Now I can't detach from that part of it. So I think there's a real danger in how we approach a lot of these things. And like you said, like, it's only going to get worse because we're going to get new tool. Like, everything's just going to get like, it's going to be new tech. It's like, oh, now we can measure rhythm. Now rhythm matters. It's like, what are you doing with that? Like, are you actually measuring whether you just get some random numbers and data pieces? Like, you see some of these, even the GPS units that some coaches are using, like, you're not doing anything with that data. It's just like this pretend competency, so you have confidence as a coach to understand. And it makes sense on the outside when you understand just how complex the body is, and just how many, like, and not only the singular body, but then you have this body competing in the environment of the world and 20 other bodies on the court. So you have so much complexity going on that, like, to not be completely lost, you have to do it in some sense. But I think just pulling it back and red pilling yourself enough to understand you are putting it into a system, and that system is just helping you in this moment, rather than pretending like we have all these answers. Like I think that's very important, and something, again, I feel like you do a really nice job of is like you systemize it just enough to make it make sense in the time being, while being able to look at the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I think my mind definitely, I mean, I would say from square one, at least in formal coaching, it was always just looking at sets and reps and, you know, overarching structures, which is, I mean, you need that stuff, you know, I mean, that's important, but the ability to, I think then to see that where that fails or where that fails particular athletes, or even, I mean, I think the ultimate in so many ways is how do we compare these things to like jump training versus go play basketball and dunk in between games? You know, you always have to put this frame of reference to something that's a little bit more open-ended and chaotic and constantly be measuring yourself like that. I will say one thing that I have been thinking about lately is when I started training, though, there was no manual and I had to figure it all out myself through intuition. I think Dan Bach was like that too. It's just like, you know, back then it's like the jump program in the back of Slam magazine, or, and you're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. I couldn't imagine it'd be so interesting and different to try to learn like just jumping higher now, because you go and you're just instantly inundated by a saturated market that's trying to gain your attention, that are all probably pretty good jump programs, but then you lose that process of needing to, and I think you certainly can still go through all those pieces, but I think that's at the same time why I did get into standard, like, you know, strength and conditioning internships. And I know that you and I both realize this, the further you get with like the motor learning stuff, this applies to anything. Like it could be running, like, oh, I have a system for running, but it could be the football coach who has a system for their offense that they won't, you know, quit on or whatever. I'm sure you have tons of experience seeing that. So it's like the more you can dial into this for any skill as a practice, you just can get globally better at it. But was interesting to me with my start with strength and conditioning is it was only a system. And my first internship in strength and conditioning made me not want to be a strength coach. And I didn't know why. All I knew is I was really bored. And I think the more I go along, I just realize it's just because there was no, all that art that you could call it the feminine side, the intuition, the exploration, and then seeing that culminate in outputs, which was the reward. I saw none of that. I just saw a bunch of lifts being coached and I didn't know why. And there was really, they tested them twice a semester in, you know, the markers, the sprint and vertical jump and things like that. So it's like, what are we doing here? It was so demotivating as it was presented. And so, you know, I've kind of been thinking a little bit about that too lately, but yeah, it would be interesting to have, that's the one thing I think about all this a lot is all the motor learning stuff. I know the podcast I do, motor learning is actually one of the least, like all the podcasts on motor learning actually are some of the less watched shows. And I wonder why that is, because I look at, like, I think as we grow as coaches, that gets more and more and more. And I know for me, that's got more important every single year. I mean, the last time I read Rob Gray's book again, I was like, holy shit. And I had like 3 new things I tried and it was awesome. And so I just find it interesting how that still isn't much of a concern for a lot of people, but maybe it's also the structure of the industry. Because I think you could be a strength coach at a university and not need to know much about motor learning as per the scope of your job and what keeps you employed and in good standing with your coaches. So yeah, it's been interesting thinking about all these things.
Well, you triggered a thought when you first started talking about how like there's an art to making the art in the feminine side digestible too, which I think is where, like, I think I kind of have a skill set there because I'm flamboyant and I'm fucking out there and I just like throw memes and stuff like that. But it triggered a thought. It's like the psychedelics. I went to the psychedelic conference in Denver, and they had a bunch of comedians there, like the Key and Peele comedians, a bunch of guys there on stage. And one of the big questions that they had was like, so the psychedelic conference, their whole thing is like to make psychedelics more legit. Like it's the smartest neuroscientists in the world presenting over and over again. It's not like a bunch of hippies. I mean, there were hippies like upstairs doing their own thing, whatever. But like the actual presentation was like the smartest neuroscientists in the world talking about how to make this more legit. How can we get this legalized, and like making sure they don't, like, they're very serious on not fucking it up, not letting like some just random dude mess it up because he's just preaching mushrooms to everybody. And then they had these comedians on and they're like, well, why would you have comedians on if your whole point is to not mess this up? And one of the biggest takeaways I took from that is they were talking is like, comedy is one of the best ways to get this woo-woo-y art out there, to lower people's defenses, to allow them to like digest the information. And they were talking about how you can't just throw everything at somebody and be like, here, take this, digest this, I'm right. Like that's never going to work. Whereas if you can do it in a comedic way, then they can lower their thing and then be like, oh, I'm actually interested in it. Oh, that made me laugh. And you play with the psychology a little bit. And that's where it's like, I think a lot of the motor science, because it is so like, either it's super woo-woo or it's so science-based to where like people just are like they can't digest it, like, and it's not entertaining off the very first bat. Whereas if you tell them, hey, I'm gonna get you faster, here's 5 steps how, they can go do that. And I think that is there's a real art in making what you want your art to be digestible and having people understand that. And you don't have to do it all the time too, because then you would have like some of the greatest artists in the world would frown upon that thought process and be like, well, if it's art, people will respect it eventually. And in our world, and I agree with that. So I think like I talk to a lot of my buddies about this, is like some posts in some like way need to just be full on art, like just your full on Picasso paintings. We don't really give a fuck what people think about it. Like it's like I felt those words, I felt that post, whatever I wanted to say there. And for the people that are in the moment and invested in what you're doing, they're going to respect that and look at it like a piece of art. But you also need to find a way to like the funnel system, like funnel people in and have some memes and have some things that are able to get people like, oh, this guy's not just shoving his philosophies down my throat over and over again. And he's not just going 7 steps of philosophy way too deep on me right away. He has a funny meme that I can laugh at. Let's dig a little bit deeper into here. And I think that's something, even just looking at like the emergence world and the skill conference I was at, it's like, we're poor at that. Like the field is very poor at that, of making these things fun to be a part of, interesting to be in. Just art. Like we're poor at making it art. And I think that is kind of the next step and the next wave of how do we get people into this stuff? We make them interesting. We make it like West Side. Like, no shit, West Side and Conjugate's so interesting. Go look at Louis. Like flamboyant, screaming, yelling, hype videos everywhere. It's like, this is like every young kid looks at it, like wants to do it. And then you look at some of like the skill stuff is like, okay, so we're gonna move this way because we're constraints and we're building this. And it's like nobody wants to be a part of that. So that just triggered a thought too. Is like there's a real art in making your art digestible.
Yeah. I think with all that, you're totally right. Because I think that if you're like average, be it sport coach, strength coach, maybe you're just a sports dad and you like learning about this stuff. I think the scientific lingo that goes with the current like motor learning industry, like even me, like I'll listen to it, or I remember 5 years ago, I'm instantly overwhelmed by the number of words that I don't understand. Now I know that affordance means an opportunity in a sport, which is very simple. I just think that it's like it's called like the curse of knowledge though too. Once you know a certain amount, it can be very difficult to dilute down some of the more technical terms. But at the end of the day, I mean, I would imagine that a lot of good skilled coaches are already doing these things on that intuitive artistic level already. A lot of the coaches are not, but a good coach, if you went there, you could say, okay, well, he's doing this or she is doing this, and give it the terminology. But a lot of it is that I think that linguistic barrier to entry. It is interesting, right? Like science, air quotes here, is the entry for a lot of people because that's something or results. Because with Louis, like they were getting amazing results. And I think that's part of the reason he was able to do that. And I think that's one of the things, to me, human movement is special, because if you it's like, well, how do you quantify art? Like, do you go to the art studio and like there's like ratings, this is like a 4.88 like Picasso or something? You don't have that. But what's interesting is, and I will say it's almost like there's 2 pieces of the human movement equation. I mean, to me, I think the art side of movement that is competitive can be quantified by wins and losses. Did the plays on the field work? How well were the athletes able to organize on the field and problem solve to win? What was your sprint time? What was your jump height? Like, that's where you can validate the art because the number got tagged to it. But then the other validation is the pure inner game. This would be a little bit more like Aaron Cantor has been teaching me a lot lately, is like, I was just outside the other day, like putting away the hose in my side yard, and my 5-year-old just ran and jumped on me. He just wanted to play. And so I like started acting like a rhino and started hitting it with my head. And like, he's like laughing uncontrollably. He thinks it's hilarious, but that is the measure of that success. It's not a score. It's how much fun did you have? And I think that's maybe the yin and yang too, is we are so hung up on only the score and only the output. And we care very little about how much fun did we have? How much were we laughing? Were you having fun? and even how we relate to each other after that kind of thing. Now, of course, we all like part of playing is also wanting to win. And I think that's where, like, you know, if you're the hippies upstairs, like you were talking about, you would get the impression they don't care about any sort of competition or anything like that. I think it's all important, but I do think that those are also two important pieces of it. And I'm sure, you know, in your gameplay and things like that, I'm sure you're getting a ton of that stuff, you know, and seeing that unfold before your eyes.
Yeah, I think we're on very similar wavelengths here too, because it's like one of the things that I've been thinking about a ton is like enjoying the session for a session. Like,
Yeah.
like you said, we've swung so much to like a session needs to be filling a bucket, a session needs to be max effort lower, the session needs to be, it's like, yes. Like, but you can also just enjoy the session for the session, and you're still gonna get like this is a thing like where I feel like our ego gets so far in the way. It's like it's almost like this fear that if we don't go so far in this, we're gonna fall behind. Like it's this keep up game of we're not doing enough, it's not okay, it's I need to get numbers, whatever it is, and we have this fear, we have this ego to where we need to fill every single bucket every single session, you know. And then you train the athletes to be the same way, like I had a bad session, I need, like, you get them freaking out, you get everybody paranoid, and it's like, okay, what if we approach it in a way from over here of let's enjoy this session for this session, then look at all the stimulus you get out, and look at how many times you get those athletes to show up repeatedly because they just enjoy the session for the session. Because what I feel like sometimes it's like, just because you don't market and you don't like, you don't put it in a bucket doesn't mean you're not filling that bucket. Like we got 100 sprints in today doing this small sided game, you know, just because it's not in a straight line and it's not super like pretty to watch doesn't mean that the stimulus didn't happen. Like that's one of the things I feel like we get in our way so much is like that ego. It makes us paranoid. It makes us nervous that we're falling behind because we can't track it, and we always want something to fall back on. And that's the like thinking fast and slow had me thinking about this too. Is like we also negate just luck. Like we want to just pretend like it's this pretty picture in this system, and it's like, and if you systemize everything, you can always go back to something, and there's always something to fix. And it's like, maybe something bad just happened. Maybe it was just like something out there, or the other way too. Maybe it had nothing to do with what you were doing. Is something good just happened? But I think a lot of times we systemize so we have that feeling of paranoia, so we systemize, and then we have something to fall back on at all times, good or bad. We can say it was because of this, and then we have something to fix, or it's because of this, and we can have something to cheer for.
Yeah, I love that. It makes me think too about, and you're totally right. I think part of the art of coaching is having a group and knowing, you know, internally on a day, and this is where AI can't solve this for us yet. I mean, I'll never say never. Maybe in 30 years, like, you know, it doubles every year or whatever, 6 months. So, you know, who knows? But the art to say to watch a team warm up, to maybe go through a few lifts or sprints or whatever, and just say, hey, well, let's just, you know, let's just play a game. Maybe let's make a game out of this today. Maybe let's make a game out of a drill. Maybe let's play speed gate golf or something like that. Maybe let's do, if it's longer sprints or runs, let's do lottery runs where I'm going to flip a coin, and if it hits this, you're going to keep, like, just something that, if I learned anything from watching, especially time watching like swim coaches when I was at Cal, it was two of the best swim coaches in the nation, if not the world. And the cool thing about swimming is if I look at like swimming versus like track, or maybe strength and conditioning, you could put that in there too, because track and strength and conditioning are heavy in outputs, but so is swim. But because swim is in the water and it's very sensory, I think that actually leans swimming more feminine, if that makes sense. And as I've seen swim coaches compared to track coaches, swim coaches seem to have that like inner sensing just a little bit more than I think where they don't have as much as track coaches tend to be more like, oh, here's the periodization plan. We're going to go 3 weeks on, 1 week off, or 2 weeks on, then 1 week off. And then we're going to, like, track coaches are much more likely to have that masculine piece figured out. Swim coaches, they'll write, I've seen them. I saw the Tokyo Olympic head coach. He'd write the workout on the board the first half, and then while they're doing that, he'd sit there and be thinking about it on the side of the deck. And then he's writing the second half with what he's seeing, you know, and I think he knew what he was going to do. And it's always the same theme. It's not like flip a coin and it's this or that. It's always going to be the same bucket of general work, but the specifics were on the art form of it all. And one of the coolest things with swimming that, you know, mentioned like the output, right? Well, we got to get this number. If swim coaches sometimes saw like the group was tired, they needed a mental boost, it just wasn't going to be the day where they could hit that number. A lot of times they would do a get out swim, which is like, they'd make up some funky, crazy swim that one person had to do. And if they hit the time, everyone got to go home. And I remember one of them, like everyone comes back talking about this one get out swim this guy did. It was like a breaststroker, and he had to do, it's like either the 100-meter breaststroke or the 200-meter breaststroke. The 100-meter takes about a minute long course. The 200 takes about 2:15 or so, you know, depending on how good you are. And this guy had to swim with like parachutes on, swim socks. We couldn't kick well, like all the things that slowed him down to the max. And he had to do like a 200 in 5 minutes or something. And he just barely got it. And everyone went nuts, and they're all talking about it. And it's like that kind of stuff from the biopsychosocial piece that goes way beyond, all right, we got to get this time today. Here's the exact periodization today. I mean, again, you have to have a basic understanding of these things. But I think the thing with swimming that I really learned to value and appreciate and integrate was how much that sensory and that art piece and how you could manage workouts like that for a group was really cool.
Yeah, and again, it's like it doesn't mean those times don't come too. Like I like that. I think that is the biggest thing. Is like the stimulus still happens. Like you can still get PRs when you're doing it that way. Like, and a lot of times you'll get more. Like the amount of times we've had PRs where like in an athlete, like one of the biggest ones, super easy, is like flying tens. Like we'll do flying tens. It's just like, it's kind of trash. Like they're just dead. I don't know what it is. It's just not ready to sprint that day. It's not good. And you have them chase a ball. You have them chase a ball for 3 to 4 sprints. As stupid as it, like just literally throw up a ball. We'll do, like that's probably one of the big ones we do. We'll throw up a ball. It'll bounce once. They have to catch it. Then they throw it up again. Hit bounces once and catches. So it's a double chase. So you throw, catch, and almost always they'll do from like a super, like it was like 88% of their max sprint. Like, what was that? That was so gross. That was so slow. Then they'll do that flying 10 and they'll either hit a PR or right on it. And I'm like, what just happened? Like now you're engaged. Now you're ready to go. And they're like, oh yeah, let's do it. But it's like, I feel like a lot of times, like the stimulus still happens. It's not that because you approach the play, and sometimes it is. Sometimes you do the play to just mentally just get them out of it. Like it's like, man, we just need a break today, or just need something like that, or like the get out swims. You know, like just give them something to talk. But a lot of times, it's like you're still going to get you're still going to get those PRs, and now they're having fun while they're PRing. And once you have that, it's kind of tough to beat a training session where everybody's PRing and everybody's engaged and yelling. And then you get it like every day too. I think that's the big thing I want to talk to you about too. You said like where they test twice, like throughout the whole thing. It's like in our training, we're testing every single day in some regard. We're gamifying in some way. We're showing them the ability to win in some way, in some sort of movement. And I think that is super big for athletes to show up for. And again, all we're trying to do is get them obsessed with what we're doing, like get them engaged in what they're doing. That's the way you're going to get results, is having them in love with what they're doing for 10 years. And then they're just going to continually do that. And if they're not in love with it, if they're not enjoying it, good luck with the rest of it. Like you're not going to do it. So it's like, we have our sessions at 6 a.m. every morning. We have these athletes, like nobody wants to wake up at 6 a.m., especially for a private sector thing. It's not like they're required to show up. Like they're paying me to show up at 6 a.m. And they all show up every single day because they want to be there. And I think that's a massive part of it. And it's the same in the college sector. It's like, if the athletes don't want to be there, and they don't want to be there because they want to be sleeping, like they just don't want to be there because what they do sucks. Like I think we have a lot of the training background kind of messed up there.
Yeah. I like, what you mentioned it too. I mean, ultimately it's got to be almost before anything else, like, is this stimulating? And that's where I think too, once you start to look at everything through that lens, some of the, like, even like the change, if people are coaching change of direction, I always look and say, how does this compare to when someone's doing a small sided game, and learn to have that eye for things? Or if someone's doing a medicine ball throw, how does this compare to if they are throwing a baseball as fast as possible, or a frisbee as fast or far as possible, or anything like that? And always having that, stimulus frame of mind. And then being able to, like you said, can you juggle, like, okay, here's the option 1, just linear numbers. Option 2, turn it into a game. Let's see what happens in that frame. I think, with the get out swim too, that is a little bit more peculiar to swimming, because swimming is 2-a-days, and a lot of the kids are very academic too. They have a big load academically to manage alongside of their swimming. And so I think that probably is more applicable in a really tough sport like that. But I'm sure there might be an occasion for that in more of a land-based endeavor. But it was always interesting to see that management of the mind. And you said this at one point. It was basically like, it's amazing. The older you get, the more experience you get, I think when you're younger or less experienced, you seem to think like if you do a sprint or a jump or whatever, that's all you have on the day. You did like your best and that's all you got. But then all of a sudden, what if your buddies come in, or what if there's like a girls team practicing like in the same gym? Like that's a huge, I probably jumped 3 inches higher, like just like that. I mean, you have to understand that these things are a big deal. And yeah, it's funny, even the workout, I did this workout the other day and it was like a circuit where it's funny. Like my neighbors probably think I'm crazy. Like I have a 120 meter, like low grade hill, 2 or 3 degrees. I'll do sprints up that in time. I have my own hill that's like 20 meters and like I'll do like lunges with a water bag. And what part of the workout is throwing a frisbee up the hill and trying to sprint and catch it, so it's like that's the X factor. That's like the game in the middle of the more written up stuff. And it's just I do that by necessity almost now, because if I realize that will make the sprint faster, the time sprint, it will make it better. So always pairing. And that's the art too, right? Like you don't learn that in the textbooks, that your environment has a really big impact on the ultimate times or the weight you lift or how long you could hold the ISO. So it's a big deal. I know I saw you, I think you had a post about jumping in that, like you jumped over hurdle and then, it was like later in the day and some people came in or something or challenged you and you could jump like 3 inches higher. I'm constantly thinking about that these days and it's really important.
I'm muted, talking to myself over here.
You were for a second. I was trying to come up with that. I was like,
but no, the jumping one is funny. I totally forgot about that one. Yeah, that was like I was doing like 40 jumps to start the day just by myself, working it by myself, and could not get anywhere near. And one of the high school athletes like challenged me later in the day, and first jump was a 3-inch PR. I was like, this is so crazy. Like maybe potentiation from earlier in the day, whatever you want to say. But I was like, man, I was just like, I'm not getting beat by this high schooler because I'll never hear the end of it. 3-inch PR. But one of the things that you talked about at the very start of the podcast, you talked about getting the athletes to feel, and that's something that I've really liked, the shakes and the dead weight, and just I don't even know the best way to describe it. And I know you've been in this rabbit hole much deeper than I have, but like that feel of like that dead weight or like a shake or a swing and using the momentum of your own body. For somebody that has a very like non-elastic background, when you get that feel, it's like, oh wow, that's nice. Like that feels good. That feels like how I'm supposed to move. What are you kind of doing with that feel? Like with that athlete, like how are you talking to them about that? How are you tying that in? How are you preaching to them the importance of that? Is it just that for me, it's just like I feel that I'm like that feels athletic. Like and that's a big thing. Like impulses and drop catches are another big one that athletes feel the same way. They almost always like shakes and like impulses and drop catches are all three that they go like that feels athletic. That feels fast. That feels like how I'm supposed to move. Like but like what do you do with that? How do you tangibly do something like that? Like what's kind of your approach with that feeling that we're talking about?
Yeah, dude, that's been what's filling up my journals lately is how do I take this stuff that's like the classical Qigong shake. And there's 2 places I've seen this. One is the Diego Maradona. I've been talking about him on my like emails and podcasts recently. Diego Maradona was one of the best soccer players of the all time, really, but of the 80s particularly. And there's a warm up he's really well known for. Are you good with the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. And it was there was in I think Napoli in 1986 or 1987. There was like this band, the song by Opusson called "Life Is Life," and he's doing this total dribble exhibition to the music, like all these crazy tricks to the music. Has the ball sitting on his head, his shoelaces are untied, like he is in his own world, but it's like exuding just this pure childlike joy of just playing. And what was interesting is in one of the clips, I wouldn't have thought anything of this, or not much of it, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I've been thinking about it a lot more lately, is he's just doing this whole body shake. It's like he's just like, not like, it's almost fast. It's faster than like a twerk. It's like a speed little, like a belly dance, but even faster, like faster and tighter. And if you watch like an animal, like people talk about animals, they get like, they almost die and then they have to shake real fast. There's just like that, like it's like so quick. It's just purely reflexive. So anyways, he's doing the shake, and ultimately that, yeah, like I've said before, that does disinhibit. And so, and I'll say, here's an anecdote to back in my Berkeley days. I think this is where this all stacks up for me. I should write this in my journal. Historically, I've been not a very fluid dancer. From my dancing partners throughout the years, it's always, wow, you're really tight or stiff or whatever. And it's like there's too much inhibition. And you can't just say, well, be more fluid, because then you might overcorrect. You'll just like, well, you're trying too hard to be loose. You're trying hard. You can't just try your way out of things. So long story short, I used to live in Berkeley, California, which is like the home of a lot of weird hippie shit. And it's funny because in Cincinnati, if I was going to go to like ecstatic dance, I think there's one in Cincinnati somewhere. But in Berkeley, there was one like literally 8 blocks down the road. So I just remember I went there one night, which basically ecstatic dance is dancing. There's no drugs, no like mind altering substances. And you just dance. There's not like moves. You just dance however you want. Like whatever the song comes on, your goal is to shake and move your body, whatever your body wants to do.
Is it like a class or like kind of like a bar like type thing, or what is it?
Just show up and do whatever the hell you want, basically.
Really? That's awesome.
Yes. Just go, don't hurt anybody, and just, you can go nuts, basically. And so I do this, and it's funny because I heard all this stuff about this. I don't remember from where, but I was like, oh, that sounds cool. So I go to the thing, come back. I'm dancing with my wife the next day, and she's like, you are so fluid and relaxed. Like it was like notably different. And a lot of that was just, the body is so complex. It's funny. I was going to say, I'm so far off the rails of normal strength and conditioning right now. This is so far away from the NSCA. I have nothing against the NSCA, honestly, but this is so far out in left field. Like this is, but this is it. Like, that's why though, like that. And the shaking, I think it does a lot of things. You could say from a science, you could put your science hat on and say, well, it does something to the muscle spindles or the stretch reflexes or whatever. It probably does. From a mind body thing, I think it's even bigger because we hold on to emotions in our muscles, or you could say our fascia or whatever, exactly how, but we have holding patterns. And what are you doing when you dance and you aren't even thinking and you let your body move? And there's a lot of like maybe like shaking or swinging or whatever. Is your body starts to break up those withholding patterns. I think, I don't know, you might be too young for this, but Frank Yang is a guy who was really popular in like the vertical jump. He had like a 40-inch standing, one of the very first standing 40-inch verticals on the just jump mat. This was like 20 years ago. And so, but then he had something he did like on the bus, on a crowded bus. It's like, I'm going to move every muscle in my body at the same time. It's basically just him shaking and contorting uncontrollably in front of everybody. But long story short though, is when you shake and don't try to hold back, you can release some of these withholding patterns. And ironically, yes, those are withholding patterns that are going to slow you down or cause you maybe not to jump as high, or those things. And part of that though is I think there is a funneling of that. Like, I don't think I was faster after going the next day after going to that, if that makes sense. Like there's a little bit tighter integration that needs to happen. And I'll explain that in a second with something like sprinting. And I talk about sprinting a lot. To me, sprinting is just my world where I can really have all this stuff land really directly. And then I could take it over to something else. Like even if I go play disc golf, or if I'm going and playing a game with my kids, or coaching soccer and I'm kicking the ball around at halftime or whatever, like for me, my portal is the world of running and sprinting and jumping and track type outputs. But so how do we take this over into the game? Because if you watch Maradona play, this is a guy with just pure mastery, uninhibited on the field. And if I even look at my own sporting background in basketball, what killed me was just inhibition and fear more than anything. It wasn't that I didn't have the talent, because there were so many situations, if I didn't feel pressure, if I was playing like one-on-one with a really good player, I could beat them because there was no pressure. And so much of it was that. And then where I've taken this to is like, I'll tell you about a workout I did the other day. And these are pieces that I'm starting to bring into the table, because the athlete has to buy into it. I can't just go and be like, just doing weird and crazy stuff. Before I get too far, I will say, anything that involves even like the freaking Theragun, like anything that's touching, percussive, RPR, like whatever it is, I've become actually more good with those things, because that also, like, that fits with the disinhibition. I go first to things you do in your own body, like Tommy John's talked about passive treatments. Let's like move your body first. That's first and foremost your goal. But outside of it, doing things like, like for me, like if I'm doing like a sprinting thing, like I used to just totally get away from this, because like the treatment thing, but like I'll hit like the psoas RPR points and some of the back of the head stuff in like a running workout, like towards the end of it, not the beginning, because I don't like to feel like I have to do this to be ready. It's like, I'm going to do this when it feels right. And then it really is, for me, that's really powerful. Anyways, So here's how it's shaken out for me. Here's some of the things I'm working with. One really powerful session for me. I was out, this was me. And then I can tell you about, I was talking a little bit about how this recent session I was trying to integrate this in. A lot of my stuff is online now. I'm going to be actually coaching at a nearby high school here with the track team. So I'll let you know how this goes with like high school kids and how do we find a good way to integrate it in? Because if I just go and I just start shaking like it's static dance, they're going to think I've lost it. And that's not going to connect. So like I mentioned, like the little dribble type drills for running are good. You know, there was something in the 80s. There's a really good book on Evelyn Ashford was the world record holder in the 100-meter dash in the women's 100 in the 80s, competing with all the roided up East Germans. And one of the things her coach had her do is a thing called shake-ups. It was written about in this book that I got on her training. And I was like, what the hell is a shake-up? And I finally found some random ass video that I think is it. But in some way, you could make that movement a total like disinhibition movement. Like I don't even give a shit about exactly where the joints are at exactly what time. It's more like, and the best I can describe it is think like the little foot dribble drills, but then the arms hang straight down and the shoulders shake side to side like a salsa shimmy. And it's literally just it's linking sprinting. Now it's sprinting. Say, hey, do this. Now feel more relaxed. See how loose my shoulders are. I want yours to see if you can loosen up a little bit. Now in something like sprinting, there is also a needed amount of compression. So, I mean, for some people, you know, some people are already there and they're fine. A lot of people though have a ton of just inhibition around the shoulders like crazy. I just, one of my online clients, I just last week sent him, he had sent me a sprint video and I sent him videos of salsa shimmies for his upper body. And so that's going to be some of his homework and he's cool with that. Part of it is, you know, that developing that relationship over time. All right. So, but here was the workout I did personally, and I'd invite anyone to try this, that I felt this like crazy. And this was so good. And it also tied in with something a Darian Barr told me once is I was out running in the creek, doing my little trail run thing. Then there's a trail next to the creek and it's like about 150 meters of a trail. And I time myself there. So I get my time. And then there's a field next to it. And so a lot of workouts, like my recovery days is running on random stones. I saw you running on plates one time, by the way. I thought that was awesome, like a little 2.5. And then I'll run the trails a little bit. Sometimes I'll do just run. Sometimes I'll do intervals. Sometimes I'll skip and gallop. And then I go to the field and I do crawls. And so I was doing crawls and I had headphones in and I like this app called Rock My Run because it has like, all right, 130 beats per minute. Every song in the playlist is 130 beats per minute. It's just a continuous running mix.
What is this?
It's called Rock My Run. It is the shit.
That is sick. That's awesome. I'm going to check that out.
Oh, the best $8 a month ever. Seriously, the best thing ever. And so I have this constant beat. And so my crawl workout was crawl 10 yards, which is nothing. Stand up, do a Maradona shake. Like just feel his hips and shoulders separate out. Crawl 10 more meters. And I did that for just like 100 meters, 120 meters. Got back on the trail to do sprints. I have never felt my hips that like, it's hard to just, like they were loose, but they were like connected. Like the glutes were just hitting like bam, 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 bam. And I was like, I could never teach someone to do this. There is nothing like I talked about. You could either take away and disinhibit, or you could activate. There is no activation that will do that. The only thing that will do that is disinhibiting. And so for me, that was it. And the crawl too, the crawls roll to the beat. So whatever the beat was, I had to crawl to the beat, which involves a lot of rib cage movement and those kind of things. So there's your upper body, your shoulder integration. You stand up, you get your hips going, and ultimately you do need both. Like the athlete I was working with this past weekend, his shoulders was pretty easy. We could get his shoulders moving pretty well. His hips were not coming along as well, but towards the end of the session, we started to get that. So that was a specific sequence that was really helpful. Now, how do you get athletes to do that? Again, I find doing like little small amplitude sprint drill type movements to be an easy place to do it. I also like the Marinovich stuff. So we did a little bit of this the other day. If you've seen like the guy who goes by the handle Power Plus, who is taking on the Marinovich stuff, Marvin Gary's work. I saw Marvin Gary did a lot of this, and they do it in the water too. It's basically like a rapid fire. If you see like the guy will have like a physio ball and the person just has to kick it as fast as they can with their foot. That's kind of like a hamstring tantrum. For some reason, I have a knee-jerk just dislike of the hamstring tantrums. I don't know why. I did it once and I was like, I don't know what's going on here. But I mean, I'm sure it's a fine movement. But we did a little bit of like just flicking your foot up and down as fast as you possibly can in space. Because this guy also had like just around his knees, he just was kind of inhibited. Stuff just wasn't moving very quickly. So to disinhibit, I do like some of that stuff because it's kind of like you're sneaking it in. It's like Mr. Miyagi and the Karate Kid. I'm not necessarily telling you that you have to do it this way. I'm more just kind of shaking off the reins of inhibition. And even with the Marinovich stuff, like a Power Plus, you'll see like a lot of jumps where there's like a little jump and a little like double flick of the feet or something. Or even Marv Marinovich, I saw him with the video where a guy was doing pogos, and every pogo, the feet would like flick a little bit and kind of whip in the air. And so I just think I almost look at that more as just disinhibition. And then the capstone of that too is like the breathing piece too, like just box breathing, 4 in, 8 out, using the heart math, because to me that's disinhibiting like the central system, the brain, and it's disinhibiting the brain to make decisions faster. So by disinhibiting the body, shaking those things, I mean, you could just make it a whole charismatic party, just going crazy like Wim Hof style if your athletes could buy into it. I mean, that'd be wild, but yeah, so those are some things that I'm working with, because I do feel like it's something that's better to probably sneak in at first, unless your athletes are like, oh yeah, anything you say, coach, we're gonna do and we don't care. So that's where I've been going with it.
No. There's so many points I want to take there. The Power Plus one is somebody I was going to ask you about, because that's something like I watch a lot of that stuff, and it seems like that's what he's trying to get to there. And it's
Yeah.
like, I think a part of it is he's blown up so much that like everybody's kind of just hating on it because it's cool to hate on. But I was like, I was
Yeah.
looking at some of the stuff, and I'm like they're like, everybody's like instant dislike for tantrums. Like tantrum is such like a weird one, because like everybody says like an instant dislike for him, because it's
Yeah,
like
I don't know.
I think it was probably preached to be. I remember way back, and it was probably preached to be like, this will make you run
think
4-2,
I
so
think
like
that's
everybody
it,
has
yeah.
that instant. But like you were saying, I look at some of that stuff, I'm like, you're getting athletes to move fast. Like as silly as it is, when you get athletes to move fast and shit like that rhythm, like the amount of times they have came to me and be like, this, I feel great, I feel like,
Yeah.
and getting that
Yes.
feeling to an athlete is so important. Regardless, again, that's so much more powerful than anything. It doesn't matter if it looks silly or whatever your stimulus, or like getting that athlete to feel athletic is such an important piece that I think we miss out on. And you were talking about the shakes and the ability to disinhibit. Like I've been working on this thought process a lot. Is like, so the goal of psychedelics is to get to allow your mind to view the world in a different way and can make different connections a different way. And that's what I really feel like the goal of play can be in movement as well. It's like, just get them to like relax and be in their body, like that dancing alone for a little bit. Like just go play a silly game for a little bit for the first time and just see how your body moves and feels, and and the psychedelic like effect that can have on an athlete. And that I was talking to Locken a couple days ago about like, what's the goal of training? For me, the goal is to get as many of those psychedelic aha moments as you can. It has nothing to do with the rest of it. It's like, can you get that aha moment, that whether that is a PR in a sprint where like you've been banging like 1-1, 1-1, 1-1, and then you went 109, and like, oh, everything from there is like that aha moment. And same with like the field. There's so many times where, and obviously I'm microdosing too, so that helps. But like I've been holding a bat, and there's just like different spot. I'm like, oh, this is how I can hold the bat. This is the connection. This is the disconnect. And once you get those aha moments, there's really no looking back from those aha moments. So my thought process is like, recently it's been really, how can you build out, and how can you expose an athlete to as many environments as possible to get them to have these aha moments, these exponential growth moments, to where they don't have to look back on. And I think a lot of times we approach it so linear, to where it's like, we're never giving them that chance for that breathe, relax. Like we build up tension, we have all this stimulus, and then at one point just give them a stance to shake, or just to move, and just to feel, and then boom, that's what I was supposed to feel during this whole time. And then you kind of have that constant cycle of getting them back there. But that's really been something I've been thinking about, is how can we build out an environment, and how can we expose our athletes to as many opportunities as possible to have that aha moment, like the algorithm, like on Instagram, like you want to post every day, because it's not really about the one post. It's just about getting the lotto, the hit for the algorithm to go. Like it's the same thing in like movement. It's like, you just try, buy that lottery ticket every single day. And at some point you're going to get that's what I was supposed to feel. That's what this was supposed to be like. And from there, there's no looking back, whether it is a PR and a vert, whether it is like how you feel in a bat. But once those connections are made in the brain, it's pretty crazy the long-term effects it has on athletes.
Yeah, I think from not just performance, but also, yeah, like mental health, and then even looking at it as like a transcendent experience. I do want to say just one thing quickly too. At that time, I said my glute. I talked about putting times on these things because I was thinking about this. Is that it would be just a pure feeling to say, well, I did these shakes and my glutes felt good. I forgot to say my time. It was 120 meters, little strip of trail I was running. My time dropped a second and a half when I did that. By the way, so I want to note that's just the coolest thing. But yeah, I think the more that I've come along in training, I do view it as a chance to. And for me, it's funny because it's very narrow sometimes. It's throwing the javelin, it's doing hurdles. For me, it's a lot of track events. Or if I get to play, if they're playing ultimate frisbee at the local gym, there's like a season where the baseball players come in. I'm all about that. But for me, it's like tuning into this absolutely miraculous machine. Not even machine, this like, quantum supercomputer, whatever you want to call it, your body, and being able to interface and experience with that in a deeply meaningful way. I have a poster of Steve Prefontaine in my basement, and it's like, the famous saying, he's like, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. Mm-hmm. And it's just so funny because I used to be demotivated in my 30s to train a lot because it's like that time in my life where I'm not going to jump as high, more likely than not, than I did when I was 21. I'm doing a lot of strength training for working in the strength department now, and things have just changed. And I'm going out and I'm not seeing sprint PRs like I used to. Although I did have a fortunate stretch where I'm working with a dairy and I'm starting to see some life and light and feeling my body in new ways, which is great. But maybe it was age 35. I'm not really sure exactly, but somewhere in my 30s, there was this just like, I really don't feel like training all the time because you have that. If you're only looking at the numbers, at some point you're going to wake up and you're going to go out and those numbers aren't going to be what they used to be. So what changes things? It's like, well, now I'm going to view training just for the pure joy of training, for figuring this shit out the same way I figured it out when I was younger. But now I'm armed with all this other stuff. Like for me, I got like, I hate to call it like a bunch of gadgets, but like I went out the other day and just played around with a water bag or water bell, not a water bag, but a water bell, like in half of my training exercises for the better part of an hour. And I could have kept going another 30 minutes because I'm just trying to figure this out. I'll do my sprint. What kind of effect did it have on that? I'll throw the frisbee up the hill and chase after it. I usually do a lot of like the shaking type stuff to warm up. I like combining shaking with like altitude drops even. Like I do the old Jeremiah Flood calls it the juice, the Jay Schrader warm up, where it's like do a long iso lunge hold, do like 40 altitude drops, and then you get going. But a lot of times, like I'll do even on the drops, like I'll kind of, vibrate the foot of the leg that's on the ground. I'll shake, like if I feel a lot of tension in my face and shoulders when I hit the ground, which I noticed I started to take more of that on through my 20s and 30s, I'll shake that and then do the jump. So now I'm more pure. I'm more what I was like when I was 18 or 19 or 20. And so I'll infuse that and I'll go through in waves, where instead of like every sprint's pedal to the metal, it's like waves. All right, this one's 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. It's like you're constantly building this wave up, and then the rhythm really helps too. So the more, and then the time takes care of itself. To be honest, I've just turned 40 and I'm really blown away with how good my sprinting feels. Like it's really fun because I would say technically and how my body is sprinting is better than it's ever been in my life. I don't have quite the power to weight ratio of my younger years, but it's still pretty darn good. And that's like the fun thing, is continually being able to unlock that. It's also a lot of fun to put those training principles into someone's program who is 25 because seeing what they can do with it, so yeah, that's the big one, man. I just think that's what makes the training world come to life, because training with purely equations and sets and reps is fundamentally not that interesting by itself. At some point it's just not. It's cool to see PRs if right when you're seeing the PRs that go with it, it is fundamentally interesting. But once you get past all that for a while, you have to find new ways to kind of embody that training experience.
Yeah, well, one of the things I've been talking about too, it's like the amount of athletes that the amount of times I've heard this in like college sector, it was like, as soon as I'm done with this sport, I'm never lifting again. As soon as I'm done with it, it's like, that should be a straight up red flag that your guys' lifting sucks. Like if you build out an environment that they never want, like, are you hearing their words? They never want to do this again. And they're openly telling you this, that they never want to do this again. And that's what you're in charge of for them. Like, it blows my mind. And like you said, like, I think one of the pieces like that people can say is like we gravitate towards these things because you and I were not seeing the PR. I'm only 27, so I still have like some juice to be able to see the PRs, but it's like it's not like when you were 18 when like everything you did was a PR. So it's like, oh well, the people just naturally gravitate towards that because the ego, like they can't go into the weight room and hit it, so they need to find a different purpose. But when you apply these principles to kids that are hitting PRs and now they're enjoying hitting PRs, like there's a difference between hating everything you're doing and then one day during the 6 months of training you get the PR and like you feel good for one day out of 6 months versus like feeling great for 6 months, enjoying what you're doing, and then also hitting a PR. Like there's two very different settings, but that is one of the big thing that I've been like getting my athletes to really, really buy into and understand. It's like this is a lifelong movement journey. If at any point you feel like I don't want to train again after my sport, after it's like, again, like we're training because you enjoy the process of training and moving your body. We're not training for this big overarching goal. You have those big overarching goals. That's another thing. It's like these coaches like, oh, we're training to win. It's like those athletes already have those goals. Like you don't need to reinforce those goals. That's why they're at, especially in the college sector. It's like I didn't need to tell those athletes we want to go win a national championship. That's not what I need to train them to do. That's why they're there. They're at a high Division 1 or Division 3 level. They're coming to win a national championship. They already have that goal. They're coming to be a starter. They're doing all this. So it's like I just feel like we get lost in it. It's like we can enjoy the training session and still have those goals on the back end and understand enjoying that training session and the stimulus you get is going to lead us towards that goal. But I don't know. That's been something like enjoying the session for the session. And if an athlete ever tells you like I'm never doing this again, like we should really relook at what's happening with our training because they should never say that. They should never openly say that to the one thing you're controlling in their day.
Yeah. They say it is funny with strength and conditioning. I always felt like, I like the term, or even just sport practice. It should be the best part of your athlete's day, and really trying to think about how to make that the case. I just think it, and a lot of times, like when I was at Cal, I know I like the podcast you did. I think we did one with me, you, Jake, and Jeremy, but like just leaving the college sector. And I think one of the things that I did think about sometimes in terms of like how does all this transfer is like, how are these athletes going to perceive training once they're done swimming? Because a lot of swimmers, it is funny because with swimming too, a lot of swimmers, when they're done, they are done. Like they don't want to look at that black line anymore. I feel like track, for some reason, they keep going. Like they'll keep doing master track a little bit, jumping meets. So much more rare to see swimming because it's just like difficult, tough sport. But what's interesting is it did seem like to me the people who swam more for like kind of what you and I were talking about, the feel, the experience, the learning process, were more likely to keep swimming for fun, instead of just lifting weights for their recreational activity. So yeah, the meaning you drive and that lifelong thing, it's a big thing. And that's only something that's really truly been on my radar, I think, since I went to Rafe Kelly's Return to the Source retreat and just kind of they talk about John Vervaeke a lot and embodiment, but how different movement practices will impact you emotionally in different ways. And ultimately, that's what you really, I mean, like a workout's a workout, but if you can get a mind-body experience, feel better emotionally, connect with the group, like that's what keeps people coming back. And it doesn't even take like willpower to do that. You want to do that. And ultimately, I think you get better results too.
Yeah. And if you're looking at the world like today, it's kind of like what a lot of people are missing, like, and one of the things that you can give them is just that community of people to move with. But you just triggered a thought. It was, you were talking about in this pogo video, you triggered this here. It's like when they were jumping, the athlete that was able to jump higher was able to express more creativity in the air. And that's also been something I've been thinking about. It's like, it's almost like this exponential thing of like the good athlete can play and have fun because their skill level allows them to play and have fun. Whereas like a bad athlete, they know they do not have the freedom to play and have fun. And they like, so it's like, it can start and you see it so young too. It's like the fifth grader that's scoring the touchdowns. Like they continually score the touchdowns. They continue to like give themselves more freedom to move, less constraints. And then they continually have that exponential growth. And the athlete that started off bad. And that's one big thing that I've been thinking about a lot in training is how can you provide, and this is bad athlete per se, like so many levels. I don't want to call anybody like a bad athlete in that sense, but like so many levels to it. Like how can you provide everybody the chance for that freedom to express movement regardless of skill?
Yeah.
because because the highest level, like the highest level athletes, like they get better. They always get better. The highest, because they know they can explore and play. So not only are they already better at you, their practices are so much better than you, because now instead of like staying the same athlete, they know they have the freedom. I can try to take that step, and maybe that step that they took was just a shitty like step and it didn't work, but they know, like, okay, I'm not going to get benched for that. Like that wrong step is not going to like end my career or whatever it is. But maybe that step that they took the different way led to a totally different movement pattern, totally different solution, and was an aha moment. So then they just got better. Whereas like let's say it's a bad running back, they take that step. They know if they don't hit the hole perfect at the exact right time in the exact right way, like that's probably the only carry they're going to get in that practice if they're third or fourth string. And if they mess it up or have it like do any creative freedom there, like that's the only carry they're going to get, and now their coach is never going to hand them the ball again. And that's a real, like very real pressure in the American like football world. And that's something I've really been thinking about, is how can you build out that environment to where like that athlete that could be like, if you just give them the room to play and express and be who they want to be, and then like maybe they're just one movement pattern away from discovering, oh, I am this type of running back. I'm like a Le'Veon Bell type running back. I need to just wait, let everything develop, and then go through. But if that athlete is never given that environment, which they never are, like in our traditional setting, especially in the sports world, it's like that you're just gonna have the cream of the crop rise to the top, which is great, and you don't want to stop them from rising. You want to continue to have those best athletes rise, but then it really makes you think of like, what's your role as a coach? Like, just to let what was already naturally going to happen, or can you build out an environment in which you give athletes that do have the underlying ability, they just haven't been able to? Maybe it is they got tackled one time in fourth grade, so now they already inhibited because of that fourth grade. That happens for a lot of athletes. And you repeat that story. But how can you as a coach build out an environment that allows them to kind of, again, disinhibit, like you said, rewrite the story, or just write a new story, a new chapter that allows them to discover more movement options, so their practices are actually leading to exponential growth rather than just the great athletes having that creative freedom.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. The one of the bare bones ways that I coach like 5 and 6 year old soccer, and actually, I'll tell you what, man, like if you want to be a good coach for youth, this is where technology is actually very helpful these days. Is there's this like thing called Team Mojo, and it's got like 10 totally kid level games at that age to let kids have fun, use their imagination. Like technology is helping in there, and it's really cool. One of the things I do every now and then with my group, though, before they get a water break, I'll say, you have to score a goal in a different way, score a goal in a funny way, and like, kids are doing all sorts of funny things to score a goal, and just like trying to get that idea going early. But it's so right. Like if you watch, I remember when I was a Cal, like you'd watch like I probably told this story before, but like you watch like the gym rat that the coach loves, the strength coach loves. They're always doing the extra mile in the weight room, but then they get in the game off the bench and they're like super nervous. They're only going to do just that one thing so they don't fuck it up. You know what I'm saying? Like, and there's no creative license. And it's like, well, how do you get that person to feel a little level of creative license? I'm sure if they're going and playing 3-on-3 in the rec center, they're going to do it. But how do you get them to do that when it matters more? It's funny. I mean, for me too, I look at that. It is my coach would always agonize over the fact, and I was not great. Like I could have not played D3. I would have sat the bench in D3 in basketball probably at best. Like, but I did. But for the level I played at, I had a lot of talent and frustrated my coach. And one day he's like, "Hey Joel, you're going to be the best player on the other team this practice, because we're going to practice. We got this big game coming up. They have the player of the year. Joel, you're going to be the player in the year. So you just shoot every time you get it." And so basically it's licensed for me to be a different character. Dude, I fucking drained every shot. Like it was like, I don't know, it's something about being able to be that character. There was nothing I could do wrong. My job was just to shoot it, and who cares? Like that was it, man. That was everything I needed. And I almost wonder if there would have been a way to channel that into those practices. I like Michael Zuifel had talked about, like maybe it was you as well, giving people like superpowers. Hey, this guy's got a superpower now. And like Paul Cater has talked about, I know you've talked about it, like strengthening, general athletic performance is a place where you can take that pressure off. You can be a different version. You can reinvent yourself through different parameters of games, and and find meaning along the way. So that was always a really that's something I do think about a lot. And it is, I'll probably start thinking about a lot more with the the kids playing soccer, like, just like 5 and 6-year-olds running around play. We play a lot of different games too, but it might make me think about how we impact those selections as well, and creativity and how players perceive the game. But it also makes you think too, making sure that people are in a sport or an activity that allows them, that they're good enough where they get that license. Like, I can already tell, like, my daughter is probably going to love theater more than soccer someday. She's 7. She like acts like a chicken and like when she's out playing, or like tries to like be all dramatic. Like, she's funny, but I'm like, man, she'll have so much more creative license probably in theater someday than soccer. I mean, I hope she, she'll do a physical activity, I'm sure, of some sort. But it's interesting to also think about selecting something for an athlete as they go that gives you an element of creativity as you go. I'll just say one more thing too. I don't want to ramble here, but I mentioned Aaron Cantor just because he was just on my podcast. Some of his work is fresh in my head, and Aaron is a big believer in a low to no barrier of entry, whatever you're doing. So when he gets groups together, like, and we're playing games, one of his games he likes is just simply try to touch the other person. You're in groups of 2. Try to either touch the other person's face, like their cheek, not like slapping them, but gently, or tap their foot with your foot. That's the only rule. And it's not even necessarily competitive. It's kind of like explore, play, be creative. You could find creative ways to do it. The goal isn't necessarily to win. Now, for athletes, it's going to become more competitive, but it always starts out in a way with no barriers to entry and infinite options, basically. And then you and the other person get to kind of yourself kind of structure the game how you feel it fits between you guys. And I think that's how we could do it in sport too. Aaron's got some cool ideas there with sport as well, but I just think that like almost creative structuring opportunity, like 1-on-1s, 2-on-2s, where there's way more room to be creative in context with some sport parameters, could be a really cool opportunity for people to become someone else for time to time, to see a different part of who they are in sport and become a more complete player.
Yeah, that ambiguous like rule, like that's such a really good thought process too, because it does kind of turn into a dance between the two athletes, which is something hilarious because like so many athletes, just the communication piece that is required. Like if you're doing something like touch the cheek, like that's something, or like we do a lot of a lot of combat prep turns into that, because you do have to, in some sense, make it a dance. Because if you're doing touch a cheek and somebody just slaps you, like they're going to reciprocate by slapping you back. So like you have the ability to be like, okay, we got to figure out how are we going to do this. And the amount of times like I've told athletes that we're going to do something that's just weird, and they'll look at like, well, how do you want, like, just don't answer them and force them to come up with the rule, like communicate with each other. It's the dance. Like that's the whole dance and movement. There's so much more in you guys figuring out the dance than the actual dance itself, like setting that up between you two. And just how, and this is one of the things too, is like now our athletes are so together, like they figure it out so quickly because they've been together. Like a lot of our athletes have trained with us for 3 to 4 years straight, and like same group over and over again. It's pretty sweet. But I'm like, when I pull it to like I have like random high school teams that I train, and like kind of like settings like that, and you bring it to, and they aren't there, you really see how somebody that doesn't communicate that way with another human, when you should, like, we should all just be able to communicate like that and be able to dance with each other in that way. But a lot of like high school students, just they don't have that ability. They haven't done that, or a new athlete comes in and just watching that ability, like there's no experience there with that. And it's really cool to like have that outside perspective. And you're like, oh, you're trying to work your way through that. And we're kind of spoiled with our kind of setting, because now we've had athletes that like I tell them anything and they'll do it, because they're like, oh, this is weird. Like we're gonna do weird coaching. We'll figure it out. Like whatever, it's going somewhere like today. So we're kind of spoiled there. The other thing you were talking about, like that superhero story where you had to shoot every time you touch the ball. That's freaking awesome. I haven't heard that story before. That was really cool, because that made me think of the thing that kept me in college football was college track. Like that, I just remember like I picked up the weight one day. A guy forced me to come throw. And I was trash at football that first year. I was terrible. Like I was bad. I was so down on myself. Like everything was terrible. I was quitting. And I picked up the weight the first time I threw it, and it went like far for a freshman. And I was like, oh my God, I can compete at the college level. And like the track has nothing to do with football, but for some reason I just threw it and I was like, I can do this. And as soon as you have that story of like, I am now a college athlete, whereas before I was so overwhelmed with everything. And again, the physical stimulus of being good at track and being good at football, like I was just so dumb, like I didn't have those two connected. Now I was just like, I'm a college athlete because I can throw the weight. And I came back the next year and was able to start and do everything on the football field, and it has those two physically have no connection at all, no athletic thing connected. It was just the mental chapter switch of I really felt like I wasn't able to compete at the college level to one thing that allowed me to be there. And again, if you have coaches that are just giving you that ability, and this is the thing, like my freshman year, I was told to transfer out. Like I was told, like, you're not good enough to play here type thing. And I ended up being an All-American. And why that is important is because if like there are hidden All-Americans, like there are hidden like gems in there. All you have to do is give them that flip of the switch. And so many coaches are just, and it's tough as a coach too, because like college coaches are just so overwhelmed. It's like you look at their lives, they're working 80 hours a week, getting screamed at every day by their boss, at risk of being fired. Like you look, and they're just the type of personality that goes into that sector. So it's not like a caregiving, patience, long loving person that goes into those settings in the first place. But it's just like, if you just want to look at it a pure analytical setting, you want to win more games, like set your practices up in which you can find people like that, and you can discover things like that. I don't look at it in that way. I don't give a fuck about winning more games. That's not really why I want to do it. I think it's more important for the person's life. But if you are an analytical coach out there and you do want to win more games, like there's a real piece there that you are missing a lot of athletic potential there, simply because you're unwilling to, like you said, make that athlete like as a scout team player of the week. I know so many scout team players of the week, now that you say that they were made the star receiver that week, and they were throwing the ball 42 times that week, and they're like, oh my God, I can play college football. I can do this. I just torched our starting defensive back, and I haven't done anything before that. But yeah, I really like that story. I think there's a lot for me to dive into writing wise there that I enjoyed.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where you go with the writing there. That'll be, I mean, it's funny because I hadn't thought about that story with me and being the shooter for the longest time. And so now I'm like, wow, there's so many possibilities there. I'm excited to see what you end up doing with that.
Yeah, but yeah, Coach, I know we got 3 p.m. That we kind of cranked through this podcast. That was crazy. I didn't realize it got that late. But this is awesome. Thanks for being on again. I kind of just I enjoy our talks every time. Like every time we either do a conference, it's like our 15 minutes before or 10 minutes after. I'm like, bro, I need to have like him on every single month. It's super fun. So thank you for being on. Thank you for taking time. I know you got a little promo to shoot that you're super pumped for.
Oh yeah, we'll get that done. I'm gonna work out first to get some good disinhibition going, get some good mental juices going. Then we'll sit down and do that. So hey, yeah, it's great talking to you too, Austin. Thank you so much for having me on, man.
Awesome. Thank you guys for listening. Keep chopping wood.
Thank you for listening. Join us next week as we dive down another rabbit hole. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star rating. Follow us on Instagram at Austin Yokum to stay updated on future podcast guests. Keep chopping wood.